We're now going to move on to the talk, which is part of the theme of thinking about our brothers and sisters across the globe. Every night we cover a different country, and today is Senegal. We're very fortunate to have Amandla Thomas-Johnson, who will be speaking to us about Senegal. He's a journalist based there, covering West Africa, and he's a London-born journalist based in Dakar, Senegal. He's worked for Middle East Eye, the Daily Telegraph, BBC, The Guardian, Aljazeera, and was a trainee on Channel 4 Dispatches. He's the author of Becoming Kwame Ture, a biography of the civil rights activist formerly known as Stokely Carmichael. So let's welcome us with Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum. I hope everyone is doing well. My name is Amandla Thomas-Johnson. I'm a journalist, British born and bred journalist who currently resides in Senegal. And I'm here today to talk to you about Islam in Senegal and in West Africa. As you'll be hearing, this message during the month of Ramadan, I'd just like to wish everyone a purposeful Ramadan, and I pray that that our fasts are accepted and that our du'as are accepted as well. I'd also like to take the time to also ask that Allah puts barakah in our time, and that He also grants patience at this difficult time with the pandemic and everything, and blessings, and that He raises up those of us who have been affected or lost loved ones. He raises them up as martyrs as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Dakar, Dakar being the capital of Senegal. Just want to say that I'm not actually in Senegal at the moment. I'm actually in London right now. But you can see that the background image is of a scene from West Africa. That's actually, fortunately enough, from my balcony where I live in Dakar, and it's the Atlantic Ocean. And Dakar actually sits at the westernmost point, not just in Senegal, but actually in the entire continent of Africa, and by extension, the whole New World. And that's something that is of special relevance to me. As someone whose ancestors were brought as slaves or enslaved in the New World in the Caribbean from Africa, this sort of strip of land is literally the very end of the old world where my ancestors were taken from. So sort of living there has this very special sort of resonance. And what's important about the transatlantic slave trade is that something like 20 to 30, perhaps 40% of those who were taken across the Atlantic were also Muslim. So this is something which something I reflect on a lot, and sort of think about what might have happened had Islam, had those Muslims been able to keep their faith over in the New World, in places such as Brazil and such as the Caribbean, and such as the United States as well. There are, of course, some communities who have, but for the most part, many have not been able to hold into their faith. The place where I live is a small village within Dakar. Dakar is the capital of Senegal. And this village was settled by an ethnic group called the Lebu people. And the Lebu people are a small fishing community who are really quite distinct. They sort of run their community via a sort of theocracy, actually, where they have a sort of religious leader, and they have their own sort of distinct sort of Islamic sect. And this small movement was founded in the 19th century by a man who basically sort of claimed to be the Mahdi, and was able to basically attract some followers to him, and that community is quite influential across Dakar, which is the capital of Senegal. And just up the coast, this figure is actually buried in a sort of grand sort of mausoleum. For the most part, however, Senegalese people would tend to fall within two sort of, or a number of sort of larger sort of Sufi sort of movements. It's a country which is more than 90% Muslim, and for the most part, Sufism is a sort of dominant way of Islam in Senegal. I will come on to the details of those sort of movements for a bit later on. But first, just to sort of tell you about sort of how Islam is very much embedded in the sort of local way of life. Sometimes you're walking down the street and you have to sort of cross the road because someone just is sort of praying right on the pavement in front of you. You sort of there's a sense in Senegal, and I've seen this in other parts of West Africa where people treat one another with a sense of sort of brotherhood and sisterhood. The norm is that we are in this together, and that's kind of like actually a phrase that people often say. When you do something for someone or they do something for you, and they sort of say, we are together. There's something they sort of say. So there really is a sense of or sort of a collective responsibility and sort of love, which I've sort of found there as well. For me, it's interesting. This is the first time I've lived in a Muslim majority country, and coming from the West, there's a sort of sense that religion is something which is private or something which is separate from other things. And the wonderful thing about Senegal is that just really isn't the case. If I happen to go to a nice restaurant on the sort of rare occasions, there's nothing wrong with me asking for prayer mat and sort of praying. Even institutions which serve mainly sort of Western customers, for example, you'll see little sort of masallas around the town, with sort of like walled enclosures, basically, where taxi drivers might stop off and offer their prayers. So Islam is very much sort of present, in the sort of in the daily life, in the geography of Senegal. But I wouldn't say that it's something where it's also very tolerant and very accepting of difference. It's a society that is tolerant and accepting of difference as well. And I haven't really ever got sort of impression that it's in any way some sort of it's very much each to their own, if I could put it that way. So about the sort of main Islamic movements in Senegal. So the first one I'll talk about are called the Marids, and the Marid movement was really sort of founded in sort of late 19th century. And its main figure was someone called Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, who's affectionately known as Serin Touba or Saint Touba. And Ahmadou Bamba was a sort of Senegalese sort of scholar, basically, and sort of teacher, and he wrote poems, he wrote hymns, he wrote he was prolific, really. And he really sort of starts off this movement and becomes an inspiration. And even to this day, he's almost like, if you wanted to sort of compare, you could almost say he's like the patron saint of Senegal, or you could even say that he's a sort of national hero, in a way. His image appears around the city. It's sort of scrawled on walls. You sort of see it hanging in sort of taxis. You hear his hymns being sung, in zikrs, on the side of the streets, all hours of the morning or even during the day. So he really, I think, his movement, the Marid movement, really sort of set the tone of Islam in Senegal. What's interesting about the Marid movement is that they've really sought to indigenize Islam. What I mean by that is that they're, of course, they pray in Arabic and they read the Quran, but a lot of, for example, some of the hymns they sing and some of the sort of zikrs they do are actually in the Wolof language, which is the local language here, and it's something which is very accessible to local people, which I think is part of the reason why it's been able to become so popular. There isn't as strong an emphasis on scholarship as with other movements, the Murids. But again, and another way that they've sort of indigenized Islam is the Murids have a holy city called Tuba, and this is where Sheikh Ahmadu Bamba is buried, and other members of his family and successors. And every sort of year, around October, they have a Grand Maga, which is a big pilgrimage, basically. Up to 5 million people cram into this relatively small city, and they would sort of circumambulate the mosque in the same way that others might do in sort of holy shrines in other parts of the world, other parts of the Muslim world as well. So Tuba is really a sort of holy city, for the Murids. What's also significant about Bamba is that he's also held to have performed a number of miracles. Just to go back into the history of the movement, the French, who were the colonial powers in Senegal, really tried to sort of persecute him, as a way to sort of stop the growth of this movement. And he was actually exiled, a number of times. Once to Gabon, which is very far away, sort of Central Africa, actually, thousands of miles away. And his followers believe that he performed a number of miracles. One of them was that on the boat on his way into exile, he is said to have somehow managed to evade his captors and performed his salah on the sea. A sort of carpet appeared and he performed his salah on the sea. There are other sort of miracles which are attributed to him as well. Interesting enough about the Murid movement is that they also have a big investment in the peanut trade, which is the third largest export. Peanuts are the third largest export in Senegal, and historically the Murids have controlled the peanut trade since the time of the sort of the French era. So they also have quite a lot of economic clout in Senegal, and also political sway as well. It's normal for presidential hopefuls to pay a visit to the Khalifa of the Murid movement, and to sort of seek his advice and his sort of endorsement. That's something that has happened in the past. We've even had presidents in Senegal who have been part of the Murid movement as well. In terms of followers, so there is a very sort of like followers of Murids, of Islam, in general. There's a sort of culture of striking up relationships with marabouts. Basically, marabouts are sort of, you say, holy men, imams, or mullahs, or sort of scholars, you could say. But these are sort of people who people would go to for advice. Sometimes they'll go to for them to make du'as. In other instances, and we're talking now if we look at sort of hierarchies within sort of Sufi orders, followers would often do some work for their own marabout. So some followers will have their own marabout and they'll do work for them, and sometimes that work might involve actually going to the peanut farm of the marabout and actually helping out, and just sort of maybe looking after, cooking for them. It could be all sorts of things. So it's interesting that this relationship, you could say, transcends not just sort of necessarily spiritual relationships, but goes into the realm of sort of actual sort of like labor as well. And I would say that the Murid movement is probably the most popular Muslim movement in Senegal, as well as in the Gambia, which is another country which is more or less inside Senegal. It's an independent sovereign nation inside Senegal. but it was colonized by the British, which basically sort of carved out their own sort of sphere of influence in what is otherwise was a sort of French zone. So these two countries, they have the same culture and ethnic groups, and the Maoris are also big there. But I would say it's also a very Senegalese phenomenon, and that kind of brings me on to another sort of Sufi movement, who are called the Tijaniya. I'm sure you've some of you would have heard of them before. And Tijanis have, there are a number of different sort of Tijani movements around the world, but one of the largest ones is based in a place called Medina Bay, which is a sort of a town or a village within a city called Kaolack, in Senegal as well. And what's interesting about the Tijanis of Medina Bay is they're actually one of the largest, they claim to be perhaps the largest Islamic movement in West Africa. So they claim to have over 100 million followers. And indeed, there are some very prominent Muslims throughout the region who are members of this movement. We know that historically in Nigeria, the sultans of Kano, a state in the north of Nigeria, which is of historical importance to the sort of Hausa people, have traditionally been members or leaders of the Tijan movement in Nigeria. So it has a very big following throughout Nigeria as well. And you sort of contrast, if you contrast the two, the Tijani have a sort of this sort of global, transnational sort of movement. They have followers in the UK. They have followers in the United States as well. And you can really sort of, I think, trace some of this through the person who really brought this movement to Senegal. And his name was Alhaj Umar Tal. And though the Ahmed Tijani was the founder of the movement, and he was founded in Algeria, it was Alhaj Umar Tal who was a sort of political kind of a warrior, you could say, who really brought it into Senegal, and he conquered areas to the north of Senegal and brought this movement in. And he managed to actually create a short-lived empire which stretched from modern-day Senegal into sort of central Mali. He has quite a sort of colourful biography in that he, as his name suggests, he performed the Hajj. He visited Syria, where you met the leaders of Syria. We're talking now in the sort of 19th century. And he also married the daughter of Uthman Dan Fodio, who is sort of the great Fulani Muslim Sultan, the founder of the Sokoto Caliphate in northern Nigeria, a very significant figure, probably the most significant figure in sort of Islam West Africa over the last sort of 200-300 years. So what are the Tijanis about? So I've visited Touba and I visited Medina Bay, and what I found very interesting about Medina Bay is how sort of cosmopolitan it is. When you go there, you will sort of see tall Hausa men wearing their sort of traditional sort of agbada or bubu, a sort of long flowing sort of gown. You will see sort of Mauritanian sort of Arabs dressed in their sort of light blue sort of robes. You will see people from I've sat in a room in Medina Bay where I heard people were speaking. I heard there were South London accents in the room. There were people from Brooklyn. It was a very much a global movement. And what's interesting is that you can actually get by sort of speaking Arabic, or even English can get you quite far, or Hausa. So it's very much a Muslim center where people are coming and going all the time from different parts of the world. And they'll come for a few days and they'll see their sheikh. And then they'll leave, basically. So it's very much a sort of transnational sort of movement, and you'll also see some scholars from Al-Azhar sends a number of scholars to teach. So it's a religious center. It's a place of learning. It's a place of sort of spiritual reflection, and the Tijanis really pride themselves actually in making Sufism accessible to the layman, basically, rather than have this sort of a sort of hierarchy, whereby people at the top are sort of initiated into the sort of the inner secrets, or are given certain sort of exclusive spiritual knowledge. Tijanis really pride themselves on allowing anyone who follows their way access to Allah, basically, and that's I think that's a very important point with them, that they try to sort of democratize their movement. Their most important leader, I've spoken about El Hajj Mu'tal, but in the 20th century, the most important leader was someone called Ibrahim Niasse, who was a Senegalese leader, and he really hit the road and walked around, it is said, West Africa from village to village, really trying to spread the word of Islam and Tijanis, and he's really credited with bringing the multitudes really to Islam. I'm not sure how much you're aware of sort of Islam in West Africa, but Christianity and Islam has been in West Africa for like more than 1,000 years, but there's been a massive wave of conversions actually within the last 100 or so years to Islam and to Christianity as well. So there's been a lot of flux actually quite recently in terms of people coming to Islam, which is interesting. When you actually dig back, you find that some people are sort of 4 or 5 generations, others who go way back. But there is that sort of flux that's taken place in relatively recent years, which is of course quite fascinating. Even though you can trace Islamic movements hundreds and hundreds of years, back to the sort of 10th century in West Africa. What I've just said is, the same goes for other parts of the world. In fact, actually, while political elites might have become Muslim, it was always taken, and it's still a process where people outside of urban centres, sort of take longer to follow on, if that is what actually happens. Ibrahim Niasse is also buried at this place, Medina Bay, as well, and so his graveside is a place of pilgrimage, for many people. I think I will sort of end it there. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions people might have, or to point people in the right direction. There are people out there who know much more about this than I do, and there are a number of books out there as well, which I would really recommend that you sort of tap into. I think it's quite unfortunate, I think, that there does seem to have been a sort of neglect of West African Islam, in our sort of deliberations and our sort of thinking about the Muslim world, and it's really remarkable, because actually in West Africa you have such a concentration of Muslim majority countries. You have Senegal, you have Mali, you have Sierra Leone, you have Gambia, you have Chad, Niger, you have much of West Africa actually, and even Nigeria is a Muslim majority country. So I'd really encourage you to sort of take an interest and to sort of follow developments in that part of the world, and of course to remember them in your du'as as well. Jazakumullah khair for listening, and I hope it has been beneficial. Okay, assalamu alaikum.